All right, so now that I'm feeling and looking clean, the first thing that I'm gonna do is take my beauty blender and I'm gonna get it wet. If you are not using your beauty blender wet, you are doing it wrong. Take the beauty blender, I let the water run over it, and then I squeeze it like this. You can see it's full of water right now, but I just squeeze it like this 10 or 15 times so it kind of absorbs the water. And then at the very end, I will squeeze all the water out of it. Blah. So I'm squeezing any excess water out. You want it to be damp. If it's a little bit more wet than that, it can take your makeup products off. So we don't want that to happen. We want it to work with us, not against us. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna walk through how I apply my foundation every morning. Now this is for my everyday makeup look if I am leaving the house. I definitely will switch up foundations, and sometimes I will not do as intense of an application for more of a light makeup look. That said, this is still not a difficult application. It just requires more product. First things first, I will apply my primer. This is my absolute favorite primer. I love this stuff. It is pricey. I think it's about $100 for a bottle. I use 2 squirts of it, so not much. It will last you a while. So I will apply this to primarily my cheeks. That's where I focus because that's where I end up putting most of my makeup. But I will spread the rest all over my face. It is like a silicone texture and it spreads really easy. If you're familiar with the Supergoop sunscreen that I just used, it is very similar to that. It's like a silicone texture and it spreads really, really easily. And it's gonna feel almost like it instantly absorbs. You're like, am I really spreading anything? I think you are, because it makes my makeup stay all day. So I'm gonna say yes, but you only need like 2 pumps and it goes a long way. I have noticed though that because it is thicker, if you lay the product on its side, which I keep everything in my drawer next to me and I do lay it on its side, that's how I discovered this. The little stick that goes in that pulls the product up can't reach the product and you're gonna be like, are you kidding me? Is this empty already? Give it a shake or like change the position. It takes a minute, like it's not instantaneous because it's not liquid, it is like a thicker silicone. It will come back to life. This is my favorite primer that I use. It works well with all foundation types. I'm about to use the Tom Ford foundation, the soft matte traceless foundation that technically goes with the primer, but I've used that primer with other foundations and it worked well. It is not brand or type specific. About a year ago, I got a sample from Sephora in the mail. It was similar to this right here, Born This Way by Too Faced foundation, but it was Tom Ford. But what I liked about it is that they gave you these little buckets of color in varying shades. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, that would make a really pretty contour kit. Then I thought to myself, well, let me just try to apply this in more of a contour way instead of all over foundation and like layering heavy contour powders or something on top. I apply 3 different shades of foundation as an initial layer and blend those together so that I can kind of contour my face with my initial layer of foundation instead of having to build it. It just lets me wear less makeup and I think it looks better. So that is what I typically do if I'm trying to do like a full face and really care about my makeup that day. Honestly, it doesn't take any more time than applying a normal foundation. I take my beauty blender, flip it upside down. I'm going to use the larger edge, and I take my first Tom Ford foundation in the shade Mocha. That is what I use for this. I am obviously not this skin color, so this is where the contouring comes in. Oh, and these bottles are just cool, right? Because you twist and it pops out. Mine's clearly dirty because I use it a lot. I'm going to do just 1 pump on top. And I'm going to dab these in the areas that I want to contour. I have a bit of a round face, so I like to make my jawline a little sharper. Like I really like to draw attention to that. So I will contour underneath to accent the jawline to make it sharper. If you have a round face and you are trying to make your jawline kind of protrude, you want to create depth underneath it, right? So that's exactly what I do by applying the contour there. Now, if I had maybe a really strong jawline already and I was trying to blend it more with my neck so it didn't look as strong, you could apply the contour like right on the edge, and that's going to create depth here. so that it's not going to look as strong, right? So like think wherever you want it to look like it's sinking in, like wherever you want to create more depth, that's where you want to add the darker shade. So for me, once again, round face, I want to try to create that cheekbone here. I don't have very strong cheekbones, so I have to build them. So I'm going to add this darker shade. I'm blending this in. And sometimes I do a good job, sometimes I put it a little higher than I should. Like on this side, I put it a little bit higher than I should, and so you can kind of see that's blending on top. Ideally, I would put it right below the cheek line. I'm going to blend this more too, by the way. So I go through and I do an initial blending of all these dots. The reason that I do this quickly is because I don't want them to dry. I don't want it to become too tacky to where it makes it hard to blend. So I do an initial blending around the entire face. And then I go back and get a lot more detailed with the blending. And so I always try to blend up so that it lifts the face. So that's pretty well blended for me. I am going to go back and add other shades, and then that's when the edges will really blend in with those other colors, and it creates like a really, really nice blend. So think of it almost like your transition shade when you're using eyeshadow and you're trying to blend so it doesn't look like a harsh line. Right now, I get it. It looks like a harsh line. But when I add the additional shades in right here, that's when I really go to town with the blending, and it's going to look like more of a gradient, which is what we want. And a couple of tips, be sure to blend it into your hairline. I know all blonde hairstylists are hating me right now because it's going to stain your hair. It is what it is. Use a makeup wipe at the end of the day and suck it up, buttercup, because that's what you got to do, or else you're going to have a really strong line right there. It's going to look super fake. So just don't do that. Same thing here. Like if you're wearing your hair up, make sure you're blending all the way back. These are things that you should be doing. Next, I'm going to use same Tom Ford foundation, Traceless Soft Matte, and this is in the shade Porcelain. This is what I use for under my eye. This is kind of my hack to not have to use a bunch of concealer. This stuff covers really, really well, and instead of using a thick concealer under my eye, this works really well for me. If I am having a bad breakout or something, I will occasionally supplement with a concealer that is a little heavier, but this to me is the perfect amount of coverage. By the way, I'm using Tom Ford foundation because that's what I like. I think it blends really well with my skin, and it feels very natural to me. But if you like more of a full coverage, like say you like Charlotte Tilbury foundation or the Estee Lauder, both of those are more full coverage, you can still do this application technique with those. Find your foundation, right? This is just the one that works for me. So I usually do 2 pumps of the Porcelain, and I dot it underneath my eyes with the skinny edge of the Beauty Blender. I just blend in under the eyes to brighten them. And any of the extra, I just kind of like lightly dab that onto the edges of where I applied the darker shade. And it's not going to look super blended at first. That's not my priority right now. I'm trying to make sure that this application goes on smoothly. But then I'm going to go back and blend on those edges and into that hairline. So it's going to just kind of blend right here. It's going to make that look more of a gradient into that darker shade, so it looks a little bit more natural. You can already see how that like changed the shape of my face ever so slightly. All right, and then we're going to do this side. I do like to, after I apply that initial dabbing of the product, I like to push it up right near the eye waterline so that the majority of the product is being used right under my eye, because that's where I typically get dark circles. I've got 2 kids, so, you know, trying to cover the tired mom look. There we go. Okay, and that really smooths it out. And last but not least, I use my 3rd shade, which is Fawn. If I was just going to use a single shade foundation, this would be the one that I would use all over my face. Since I'm trying to create depth, that's why I use a lighter and a darker shade, and then I can use my all over shades on areas where I don't need to create quite as much dimension. So here is an example of that. What I'm doing right here is kind of like, one, reinforcing that contour line from the darker shade. Like I think of it almost like a very, very mild cut crease. So like if you think about a cut crease on the eye, like that's a very sharp line, right? You're trying to create that dramatic look. I'm doing a very, very soft version of that. I'm using deeply contrasting colors to create that illusion. This gets blended out really nicely when you start layering like setting powders and stuff on top of it. So I'm not super worried about it being a dramatic line. I kind of want that as the foundation, and then I blend as I use brushes on top of this, putting on my makeup. And I'll use the dull side of my beauty blender just to kind of tap through that and blend that so it isn't a super sharp line. Like I said, it's kind of, it's a very mild like version of a cut crease. And so that just gives like a nice gradient. I still have my built up cheekbone. Like when I turn, you can see it, but I don't turn my head and you're not like, wow, she just drew lines on her face, right? You'll notice I don't actually put any foundation right here. I get really, really oily right here. And also I'm over the age of 30 and I have lovely forehead wrinkles. And I've noticed that when I start piling foundation in throughout the day, it settles into those wrinkles and I just look older. So I avoid putting any foundation on my forehead if I can. If I am breaking out, I will try to use a heavier concealer and dab that on just to help cover it, or I will just use a heavier application of setting powder. But I've just noticed for me, like, the more makeup that goes on my forehead, the older I look, so I try to avoid that area entirely if I can. I've noticed that by applying my foundation this way, that with it really well blended from all the shades, it doesn't even look that different, like, because that's basically the color I would have used down here for coverage anyway, so it works. This is what I do. So, quick recap, Tom Ford primer is my favorite. You don't have to use this primer, but I do recommend using a primer because it helps make your makeup stay and set all day. Don't skip on your primer step. For me, I personally like the Tom Ford foundation, although there are a couple of other foundations that I like and use as well. The NARS Light Reflecting is a really good one. Basically, moral of the story is find your favorite foundation, whatever works for you, if that's medium coverage or light coverage to medium coverage, or if that's a heavier foundation, they're all gonna blend the same. The fun part is picking the shades that work for you based on your skin coloring. So I like to do a much lighter shade underneath the eye. For me, that is porcelain. And then I use the mocha for a contouring around the hairline, cheekbones, and jawline. And then I pick my most agreeable shade for the majority of my face, and I use that to help blend in some of the harsher lines from my contouring. And I will use this occasionally. I'll use the most agreeable tone. I'll use that to blend any edges that look a little too harsh. That is foundation in a nutshell. Keys here, blending, blending, blending. Blending is your friend. I would recommend you spend more time investing in blending than anything else, because that's where you get those really, really strong lines, and it's just very, very obvious that you have on a bunch of makeup. That concludes foundation. Thanks for getting ready with me live on YouTube and Twitch. If you want to see more of me, which of course you do, then go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell so you'll get notified when I go live or post new content. Better yet, just come get ready with me every weekday live on Twitch.